In the old world, it's been over 120 years since the threat of the Von Carsteins against the Empire of Man was stopped at the Battle of Hel Then in 2145. King Lewin has earned his name as the Orc Slayer, wiping the Orc and Goblin menace from Bretonnia. The High Elves patrol the waters around the continent and help to maintain the peace, whilst their Wood Elf cousins remain seldom and suspicious in the forests of the world. And the Dwarfs remain industrious traders with the Empire from their holds across the world's edge and grey mountains. But in the year 2276, that fragile century of peace begins to crack. The dead stir in Hekara. Wars rise in the mountains. Chaos ships are spotted on the horizon. And evil eyes watch from the forests of the world. War is coming.
Now, in all the fun and bluster of getting a revamped, newly alive edition of Warhammer Fantasy in Warhammer The Old World, we have opened up a totally new and little known era of the Warhammer story. We've slowly been getting tidbits of lore released through each of the arcane journals. There's also been a single novel, The Lords of the Lance, and there is lore coming in the upcoming Old World role-playing game. And we know the creators of the game are pointing us in the direction of the Great War against Chaos and the Siege of Prague. But there are a number of events that happen leading up to the destruction of Prague. So where are we now? Who are the main characters of the story for the Old World? And what exactly has happened so far in the lore? What can we expect to see leading up to the Siege of Prague? In this video series, I'm going to try and answer those questions as we go through the current lore of Warhammer The Old World. We'll see what's currently happening and speculate on where we're going. So let's crack on and see what's happened with the lore.
But just a quick shout out to my wonderful top tier patrons who keep supporting me. You can join them from just £1 a month. And if you're enjoying this video, give it a quick thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more.
The information that has come out so far has also largely tracked with the release of the arcane journals. So I'll go through this as an abridged version of the story so far. Now in this episode, we'll start with the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings of Khemri, opening in the year 2276, as war comes to the border princes to the southeast of Bretonnia. A mysterious unnamed courtier has given word of the resurrection of an ancient and powerful Tomb King, Settra the Imperishable, in the lands of the dead. Hearing of this, the chivalrous Baron Carrard of the Quenelles musters a host of knights to crusade to the land of the dead and slay the Tomb King. Unfortunately for the Baron, upon meeting the Tomb King in battle, Carrard is slain. His remaining knights are routed and are pursued by Settra's army, and the remaining Bretonnian forces are forced into a desperate battle for survival. Things look bleak, and all hope seems lost. But a plucky knight slays the Amaranthine, allowing the remaining Bretonnians to cross the Black Gulf and arrive in the safe havens of the border princes. Unfortunately for the Bretonnians, Settra had an incredibly powerful ally, Settra the Imperishable. Outraged by the Bretonnians' guile, he commands the port of Zandri to prepare a fleet for Settra to overwhelm the border princes with his legions of obeying undead servants and magical constructs. He entrusts his vanguard, led by the ruthless tomb prince Ptolethor the Radiant, to sail up the treacherous Black Gulf and establish a beachhead in the border princes. If he could secure the settlements of Kassos and Thessos, he could ensure waves of refugees would be sent north, overwhelming the living defenders as Settra arrived to claim the coastal port town of Martoria. However, the Bretonnians had got word of the Nekhaharan plan and began an immediate repulsion force in the settlements, as well as sending words to more northern towns in the border princes for reinforcements. Levies are conscripted, and the force of Prince Ptolethor were not expecting the resistance and experience of the Bretonnian defenders. They knew the key weakness of the Nekhaharans were the animating forces of the Leech Priests, and targeted the cadaverous beings with ruthless efficiency, which put a halt to their necromantic work. Unfortunately, despite their pluck, they weren't able to deal with the scale of the assault by Ptolethor, who eventually razed the settlements and set his eyes on the next target, the Citadelle Buelia. Further north, the exiled Bretonnian lord, Cecil the Wormslayer, had taken in refuge the remaining forces of Duke Carrard. He was no fool, and knew of Settra's reputation and immediately sent word to King of Bretonnia, Lewin the Orcslayer. Despite his exile, Cecil was still well loved in Bretonnia. However, and unknown to Cecil, the king had bigger problems. They're already dealing with a giant orc war that's come from the mountains of the Pale Sisters in the far north of Bretonnia, drawing in several dukedoms to hold the war. The king, however, sends messages to any and all available dukes to aid the border princes, with the Red Hand of Brionne, Duke Gastille, taking the advice of his prophetess and chief advisor, the Lady Elise Duchard, to marshal his forces and ride south. They declare an errantry crusade, a chance for young knights to earn their colours and meet the Nekhaharans head on. Meanwhile, back in the land of the dead, Settra sends Hierophant Ashatuk and a number of their leashed priests of the mortuary cults to find the remains of the Amaranthine and return him to unlife to act as a trusted lieutenant. And once risen, Settra would take control of an army and march north to siege the citadel of Myrmidia and dwarvish hold of Barak Var, in an effort to stop them being able to reinforce Martoria when Settra arrived. And whilst these leech priests would most definitely not disobey Settra, there was of course no harm at all in taking a slightly longer route where they might stop by some ancient sites, read up on some forgotten books, and maybe reawaken some giant constructs. These could only help Settra, right? Leech priests on tour. Well, when they eventually found the site of Settra, they found the defeated army alright, but Settra's body was nowhere to be found. What was to be found was the nearby elvish tower of Tor Anrock. As Ashatuk's host headed towards the tower, nearby elvish settlements raced back to the safety of Tor Anrock. During a parley with the head of the Lothan Sea Guard placed in command of the tower, the elves claimed they had nothing inside the tower except for blades to resist any siege. The Tomb King's siege on Tor Anrock was brutal, with scarabs acting as horrendous vanguard, burying their way into any exposed flesh of the elvish defenders. And the elven commander was slain by the scarab lord, Prince Apophis, who appeared as a skull at the head of a host of scarabs. Many of the remaining elves were dragged underground, entombed alive as Ashatuk's forces turned their once alive tower silent. All for nothing though, as Settra's body was nowhere to be found. Across the Gulf, the Red Hand of Brionne's errantry crusade had arrived in the border princes, and received word that Sir Cecil had gone to help Martoria out. Upon hearing this, Duke Gastille committed his forces to relieve the defenders of the Citadelle Buelia from Ptolethor's attack. As they neared the citadel, the clouds darkened, and in the plains below, legions of skeletons were marching towards the tower. The giant hulking necrolith construct in the center, with Hierophant Neferkara riding atop the bone dragon. And as the being responsible for the legions, Duke Gastille knew his next target. The undead were slow to respond to the new Bretonnian relief force, as fire arrows burnt the skeleton warriors. The Lady Elise led a charging lance of knights into undead ranks, unleashing the winds of magic at her enemy atop her trusty unicorn. As Neferkara's newly resurrected skeletons were trampled by charging horses, he turned his dragon to take down the prophetess, but was struck by a flying Duke Gastille atop his royal Pegasus. Unfortunately for the Duke, he was gravely damaged upon his charge by the bone dragon's desiccating breath. After a prayer to the Lady of the Lake and a quick magic save from the prophetess Elise, Duke Gastille plot-armored his way to victory, engaging in single combat by the enraged Tomb Prince Ptolethor, who eventually was slain by the Duke. With the battle won, they had no time to take in victory, as they now had to march all the way up to Martoria to help in the aid of its defense. As they rushed north, across the Gulf, Ashurtok still searches for the body of Settra, but with Settra soon to arrive in Martoria, Ashurtok wasted no time heading north. Unfortunately for the Hierophant, orcs and goblins roamed the Badlands, and a great host of any colour looks like a great bit of fun for any budding orc war boss. A number of different warbands harassed Ashurtok's forces as they headed to the dwarven stronghold of Barak Var. As Ashurtok's progress slowed to a snail pace dealing with the greenskin menace, he decided to solve the problem once and for all. Instead of dealing with loads of smaller warbands seeking fame, he would send a message out to find the one orc warlord who ruled the lands. Challenge them to meet the Necharans in open battle, or let all other orcs know that the war boss is a coward. The orc attacks soon came to a halt, with many of the mortuary priests thinking that it was over and the road was clear. But Ashurtok knew better. This was all the calm before the storm. Soon, a sea of green raced towards the undead host, but at the center of the horde stood an orc taller than the rest, a clear head above any other shoulders, and spiked on the trophy rack on the back of the orc warboss, Septar's head. Definitely not ideal, but still workable for the mortuary cults. Meanwhile, Sir Cecil had arrived in Martoria and discovered a complete mess of a situation. The impending arrival of Settra's fleet had sent panic across the coastal settlements, with ranks of peasants exodusing the town. The remaining defenders of Martoria were put to work, with Sir Cecil's own loyal knights, alongside paid mercenary fighters and outcast wizards, set to help organize the defense against the undead. With the coastal town ready for the onslaught, Sir Cecil remained uneasy. How long would this army hold its nerve against Settra? In a last ray of hope before the siege began, news arrived of Duke Gastille's victory at the Citadelle Buelia, alongside his imminent arrival. But how far away was he? How long until his crusade arrived? So, that's the two arcane journals. And there are a few questions that we can draw from the story. Obviously, the big ones are what happens in the Siege of Martoria, and does Hierophant Ashurtok reclaim the head of Settra? What's happened back in Bretonnia with King Lewin? And I think the biggest question of all is, who is the Mysterious Courtier who sets the whole storyline in motion? If we're being generous, they've given Carrard opportunity to go on a quest. But if we're being suspicious, they've gotten the Bretonnians distracted and split. The southern dukedoms helping the war in the Border Princes, whilst the northern dukedoms are dealing with War Spinecracker. What do you think? Where do you think the courtier is from? Let me know. I wonder if we will ever find out who they are. And that's the first segment of the Arcane Journals. In the next episode, we'll look at what happens in the Dwarf and Orc Journals, picking up the next part of the story. Thanks for watching. The dead stir in Nehekara.